Hey guys, tonight we trudge into the thick, choking air of Victorian London, where soot cakes your lungs, corsets squeeze the breath out of you, and even the rats look tired. The gas lamps flicker through a haze of industrial smoke, and everything smells faintly of coal, manure, and regret. It's the kind of place where your shoes are always wet, and the word hygiene is mostly theoretical. You're dropped into the year 1850, smack in the middle of a city bursting at the seams with people, noise, and horse-drawn traffic. Everything is grimy. The buildings are tall, narrow, and often leaning at slightly suspicious angles. Children dart through the streets barefoot, dodging horse droppings and suspicious puddles that no one wants to investigate too closely. And yes, that's a dead cat floating in the gutter. Welcome home. You probably won't survive this, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't walk so much as slosh. The London fog is legendary. But tonight it's more like solid air. It's thick, yellow, and clinging. The Victorians call it pea soup, though it smells nothing like lunch. It's a blend of coal smoke, chimney soot, and chemical vapors from every factory for miles. Your lungs. Not thrilled, you grip your coat tighter. It's wool, and it scratches, but it's better than letting the damp seep in. Children run past, shouting in Cockney so thick it might as well be another language. Someone drops a chamber pot from a window above. You barely dodge. It's not personal. People just toss their waste straight into the street, often shouting Gardelot. A bastardization of the French garde à l'eau, before flinging it. That's your only warning, and it's not always given. You're learning quickly. Don't walk too close to the buildings, and never look up with your mouth open. Rats skitter everywhere. Big ones. Bold ones. One looks at you like it wants your sandwich and your wallet. You step aside respectfully. The city's rat population outnumbers humans at this point. And honestly, they're thriving. Fat, aggressive, and frequently seen nesting in basements or curled up near bakery ovens like they pay rent. Historians still argue whether rats were really the primary carriers of plague centuries earlier. But you're not sticking around to test the theory firsthand. You pass a butcher's shop. Meat hangs in the window, unrefrigerated and enthusiastically covered in flies. A couple of heads dangle by hooks. Maybe pigs, maybe not. A cheerful chalk sign advertises awful lights, which you eventually learn is lungs and intestines. Tuesday treat. Next door, a chemist's shop gleams invitingly. Shelves are lined with glass bottles in shades of blue and green. You peek inside. Laudanum, arsenic, mercury, just some of the ingredients freely available without a prescription. One tonic promises to cure gout, hysteria, and unseemly female outbursts. It glows faintly, people shuffle past, most coughing into handkerchiefs. Tuberculosis, or consumption, is the backdrop to daily life here, and everyone seems to have it. Pale cheeks, sunken eyes, a dainty little cough. It's practically fashionable. There's even a term for the ideal sickly look, consumptive chic. As you walk, you dodge a street performer. He's a one-legged fiddler with a monkey. A preacher shouts about damnation from atop an overturned crate. A constable in a tall hat saunters by, twirling a truncheon and ignoring the chaos. Victorian London doesn't have a modern police force just yet. Bobbies exist, but they're more of a suggestion than a solution. Crime thrives here. So does poverty. So does pretty much every bad thing, and yet, there's charm in the misery. Gas lamps cast a moody glow. Carriages rattle along cobblestones. Somewhere, a soprano warbles from an open window. A baker's boy runs by with a tray of rolls, and for a second, you forget that everything is damp and dying. You could almost love it. That is, if your boots weren't soaked through and you hadn't been sneezed on 3 times in the past block. You pass rows of terraced houses. Most are small and stuffed with tenants. Multiple families are crammed into a single room. Chimneys belch smoke from every roof. The air smells like roast beef, coal dust, and boiled cabbage. A heady blend. You breathe shallowly, the Thames looms ahead. It's wide, sluggish, and absolutely reeking. Don't fall in. Really. People do fall, often, and they don't always come back. The river is where waste goes, both human and industrial. One observer famously said it oozed rather than flowed. In 1858, the stench was so unbearable it shut down Parliament. That event was referred to as the Great Stink. And that was accurate branding. You stop at a pump to drink. Bad move. London's drinking water is pulled straight from the Thames and rarely filtered. Cholera outbreaks are regular. It's not until Dr. John Snow, no relation to the one who knows nothing, maps a cholera outbreak to a single water pump that people start connecting sewage to sickness. Even then, many still believe in miasma. Meaning bad air, as the true culprit. A nearby paperboy hawks the day's headlines. You glance at the broadsheet, 3 men hung for bread theft. Public turnout thrilling. Victorian justice is dramatic. It's entertainment, even. Executions are well-attended family events, complete with snacks. Yes, really, you step around a man asleep in the street. Or drunk. Or dead. Hard to say. You don't check. And that's your first hour in London. Already, your clothes smell like smoke and feet. Your shoes squelch. You're lightly damp with who knows what. But you're still alive. For now. That's not nothing, so you press on. You walk toward lodging, toward tea, or toward something vaguely cleaner. Good luck with that. This city chews people up. The trick is making it long enough to get chewed a little more slowly. Still, something about it pulls you in. Maybe it's the gaslight shimmer. Maybe it's the sense of hustle, the sheer teeming force of human survival here. Or maybe it's the faint hope that the next street won't smell quite so much like pickled despair. It will, but you'll go anyway. You drag your sore feet toward lodging, hoping for a roof, a dry corner, and something vaguely edible. The narrow lanes of London seem to fold endlessly in on themselves, twisting between flint-faced warehouses and half-timbered houses that look as though they're trying to escape the street by leaning out. You pass beneath a dangling laundry line strung between second-floor windows. Someone's bloomers slap you in the face. That seems fair. Eventually, you find a lodging house. It's called the Swan's Elbow for some reason lost to time, and the sign is half rotted through. Inside, it smells of ale, feet, and bleach. Or whatever passed for bleach in 1850, which was usually just more ale. You step up to the counter, where a man with 3 teeth and a suspiciously cheerful expression welcomes you with a thick East End accent. Single or shared, love? He asks, as if that's even a real choice. You shrug. Shared it is. He hands you a key that feels greasy. Upstairs, you open the door and instantly wish you hadn't. The room is crammed with 6 narrow cots, 1 chamber pot, 0 windows, and the ambient humidity of collective human suffering. One man is already snoring. Another is muttering to himself in French, or maybe just talking to a ghost. You claim a cot in a corner and try not to think about the stains on the sheets. Or the sounds. Or the fleas. There are definitely fleas. Historians still argue whether Victorian boarding houses truly offered a social safety net or were just middle-class nightmares in disguise. For the poor, this was luxury. Better than the workhouse, at least. Barely, a fringe fact, some lodging houses skipped the beds entirely. For a penny, you could sleep on a rope strung across the room. Literally on the rope, hunched forward like a folded chair, your armpits resting on coarse hemp. You'd be cut down at dawn. That's where we get the phrase hangover. Well, maybe. Historians are still debating that too. You lie down anyway, boots still on, because taking them off risks learning what else lives inside them. Through the thin walls, you hear everything: coughing, pacing, and something that might be an argument or just a very enthusiastic rat war. You breathe shallowly. The blanket smells like turnips. Sleep is a dare. In the morning, you wake up sore, itchy, and existentially exhausted. You stumble downstairs and into the streets, which are already churning with life. Hawkers shout prices, horses clatter by, and chimney sweeps dart between legs like soot-covered squirrels. You need food. Breakfast in Victorian London is an adventure. If you're lucky, you can grab a fry-up from a street vendor. Bread fried in drippings, maybe a piece of kipper, sometimes just a bowl of hot milk with crumbs floating like survivors. The working poor make do with pea soup, which is basically yesterday's leftovers liquefied and reheated over a coal stove. No peas involved. No guarantee it won't fight back. Still, the air smells better near the food stalls. You pass a pie seller shouting, "Hot eels! Hot eels and meat pies!" You buy one, take a bite, and realize instantly that it's 80% mystery. Could be kidney. Could be sawdust. Could be someone's ex-husband, still better than the water. Speaking of which, you pass a watercress girl, no older than 9, hawking bunches of greens for pennies. She's barefoot, cheeks smudged, and eyes sharp. Child labor is everywhere. By law, children as young as 5 can work. Many do. Chimney sweeping is the worst gig. Boys are sent up narrow flues and often get stuck, injured, or suffocated. Climbing boys they're called, like it's a game. It's not. One boy calls out, offering to shine your shoes with spit and a rag. You let him, mostly for the conversation. He asks where you're from. You say far away. He nods, like that makes sense. Better than here, he asks. You hesitate. It's different. He grins, missing 2 teeth. That's what everyone says. You walk on, shoes slightly shinier and heart slightly heavier. Next, you try to blend in. You pull your coat tighter and start walking like you know where you're going. You don't. But confidence is key. Even in 1850. Especially in 1850, Victorian London doesn't have GPS. It barely has street signs. Many people navigate by smell, which is surprisingly effective. The fishmonger district reeks of brine and old guts. The tanning yards stink like death wrapped in leather. The perfume sellers on Bond Street smell like they're covering a crime scene. You pass a lamplighter carefully climbing a ladder to light the next gas lamp. It's a dying profession, but still going in this era. He hums a tune as he strikes the match. The light flares, casting a warm glow that fights back the thickening fog. There's something poetic about it. One man keeping the darkness at bay with a flick of sulfur and hope. Nearby, a crowd gathers around a Punch and Judy show. The puppets screech, the audience laughs, and someone pickpockets 3 people before the finale. Classic London entertainment. Punch, with his twisted grin and tiny club, is wildly popular. It's slapstick, grotesque, and borderline terrifying. Children eat it up. You pause at a bookstall, fingers grazing the spines of penny dreadfuls. These are cheap, serialized stories filled with crime, gore, and moral panic. Titles like Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street and Varney the Vampire glare up at you. They cost a penny each and thrill the masses weekly. It's the original binge reading. A man next to you grumbles about how these stories corrupt the youth. He's holding 3 copies. You finally turn down a quieter alley. It's narrow, lined with shuttered windows and broken cobbles. The smell shifts. Less sewage, more damp stone and aging bread. You find yourself in the shadow of a church. It's old, leaning, and grim. A child plays with a hoop near the steps while her mother scrubs a doorstep. The church bells toll noon, a dull clang echoing through the fog. People pause to listen. Then, life resumes. That's the rhythm here. Cough, shout, shuffle, clang. Repeat. It's endless, exhausting, and oddly hypnotic. You begin to adapt. The dirt bothers you less. The smell becomes background noise. You stop dodging the rats. You walk with them. Step for step, you are becoming a Londoner. You're not even sure how long you've been walking now. Hours? Days? Victorian timekeeping isn't great for someone without a pocket watch, or pockets you trust not to be picked. The fog doesn't help. It softens the edges of the city like sleep tugging at your mind. You start to wonder if you're wandering in circles. You're not. You're headed somewhere. Somewhere important. The Thames creeps into view like a lazy gray snake. The air here is thick with moisture, coal smoke, and the distinct tang of human waste. You find yourself by the river's edge, standing near a slope of slick stone stairs where a few people are stooped low, picking through the mud with sticks and their bare hands. These are the mudlarks. Mostly women and children, though a few elderly men shuffle among them. They're scavengers. Riverbank archaeologists of despair. They comb through filth for nails, scraps of copper, lost coins, even bones. Anything they can sell. You watch a girl of maybe 7 triumphantly pluck out a boot heel and squeal like she's found treasure. In a way, she has. Historians still argue whether mudlarking was a form of economic autonomy or just another link in the Victorian chain of survival. Either way, you admire the dedication. You try not to think about what else might be buried in that muck. Bodies, for starters. The Thames keeps secrets, and it gives gifts. One fringe fact you hear whispered nearby: someone once found an entire crocodile skull in the riverbed. No one knows how it got there. Theories range from exotic pet escape to failed circus act. You make a mental note not to swim. You turn to follow the embankment and pass a group of lightermen. These are burly boatmen who navigate the heavy goods along the Thames, guiding barges like blindfolded bulls. Their arms look like they could crush walnuts. Their teeth look optional. One of them belches and offers you a ride for a shilling. You politely decline and walk on. You head toward one of the newer marvels of the age, the sewers. Now, you might think sewers aren't exactly tourist attractions. But in Victorian London, they are engineering wonders. Especially after the infamous Great Stink of 1858. That summer, the Thames got so toxic that Parliament had to soak its curtains in vinegar just to keep working. They finally approved a massive sewer system. It was designed by Joseph Bazalgette, a name that deserves to be embroidered on a pillow. Bazalgette's tunnels are vast, brick-lined arteries beneath the city, still in use today. You get a peek into one of the overflow outlets, a yawning maw in the embankment oozing something suspiciously beige. The smell curls your eyelashes. Good for the digestion, mutters a man nearby, gnawing on an apple. You don't ask him any follow-up questions. You retreat from the river and find yourself in a less industrial area, where you spot a faded sign that reads, "Public baths, 2d." You've never been so tempted. 2 pennies for hot water and 20 minutes of not smelling like a crime scene sounds like a bargain. Inside, the air is damp but comforting. The tiles are chipped, but cleanish. You hand over your coins and get a private cubicle with a metal tub, hot water piped in through hissing valves, and a towel that may once have been white. You strip, cautiously. As you soak, the city falls away. You almost forget you're in Victorian London. Almost. A spider the size of a grape reminds you. When you re-emerge, damp and mildly euphoric, you realize something shocking. You feel human again. Briefly, cleaned up and slightly less offensive to the nose, you wander into a neighborhood that clearly doesn't belong to you. The houses here are tall, uniform, and smug. Curtains twitch at your approach. This is the world of the rising middle class. Clerks, lawyers, and wives who never touch raw potatoes. You pass a governess escorting two identically dressed children, each with curls that could slice diamonds. She eyes you warily and pulls them closer. "Look, don't stare," she hisses. The children stare anyway. You try to pretend you're a journalist or an inventor. Your shoes give you away, still, you're curious. Victorian London's middle class is a new beast. Aspiring, anxious, addicted to propriety. They devour etiquette books and spend evenings debating whether an asparagus tongue is necessary at informal suppers. Apparently, it is. You sneak a peek through a parlor window and catch a glimpse of domestic glory. Wallpaper with hand-painted roses, a piano draped in lace, and a stuffed bird under glass. A woman in crinoline sips tea as if it's a competition. The Victorians love their tea. The empire runs on it. India, China, Ceylon, all funneled into dainty porcelain cups with saucers that cost more than your weekly rent. You finally try some at a tea room, served by a waitress whose smile is regulation but her eyes are somewhere else entirely. You pick a biscuit that tastes like chalk and lavender. At least it's dry. You make small talk with a man reading the Times. He's horrified by the French. That seems to be the standard opinion. Anarchists and absinthe drinkers, the lot of them, he mutters, as if absinthe is a character flaw. You nod solemnly, sipping tea like you've always done it. Just ignore the fact that you nearly inhale the whole cup in one gulp. You're still learning. Historians still debate how much upward mobility was truly possible for people in the Victorian age. For every story of a bootblack becoming a banker, there were 1,000 crushed dreams. And crushed fingers in factory gears. But the dream was there. The illusion of progress. Tea and crinolines and a piano in the parlor. You step back into the street and breathe in. Still London. Still damp. Still alive, a newspaper boy hawks headlines. Something about the Queen's latest health scare, a murder in Whitechapel, and a comet that might or might not destroy everything. It's the end of days. He shouts, half hoping it's true. You buy a paper for a halfpenny and fold it under your arm like you know how to read. The city continues to churn around you. Soot, ambition, survival, and lace. You're in the thick of it now. And you realize something unexpected. You're not surviving London, you're becoming it. The cobbles beneath your feet shift slightly, slick with morning drizzle and something less dignified. You've long stopped trying to identify the exact nature of London's grime. If it sticks, it's probably from a horse. If it doesn't, avoid stepping in it again. You drift through a narrow alleyway, where tenements loom like weary sentries on either side. The walls are close, and laundry lines crisscross overhead like makeshift spiderwebs. Damp trousers, threadbare underthings, and a few stray handkerchiefs sway in the breeze. You resist the urge to duck, as if they might drip personality onto you. A woman leans out a window and tosses a bucket of something unidentifiable into the gutter. You jump back just in time. She doesn't look sorry. Here, in the tight underbelly of London's housing crisis, you're witnessing the living quarters of the city's underclass. Overcrowding is the rule. Families of 10 share a single room. They cook, eat, argue, give birth, and die all in the same 12 square feet. You pass a doorway where 2 boys and a goat are curled up asleep under the same blanket. One of them snores like a pensioner. You hear a shout about stolen bread and see a child no older than 8 dart past. He's barefoot, cheeks smeared with soot, and a heel of crust is clutched triumphantly in one hand. He disappears into the maze before you can blink. Was it theft or dinner? Historians still argue whether London street children were criminal by necessity or simply by label. Caught in a system that never gave them a chance to begin with, some of them make their way to the ragged schools, charity-funded education for the poorest kids. You wander into one on a whim, passing under a hand-painted sign that reads "God sees all." You hope he brought gloves. Inside, the room is cramped but filled with the low murmur of recitation. Rows of children sit on benches, copying letters with chalk on slates. A teacher paces slowly, eyes sharp, voice gentler than you'd expect. She corrects a boy's spelling with the kind of patience you can't fake. He grins, missing 3 teeth. Possibly 4, you sit in the back for a moment, unnoticed. The air smells of ink, unwashed socks, and determination. It's oddly comforting. The lesson today is geography. Where is Canada, and why does it matter? You want to raise your hand and ask about climate change but decide against time-traveling controversies for now. You slip out and make your way towards something you've been warned about repeatedly, the workhouse. And yes, it's every bit as bleak as promised. From the outside, it looks like a prison. In many ways, it functions like one. You see a line of gaunt figures shuffling toward the entrance. Hats in hand, shoulders hunched as if weighed down by their own failure. Once inside, they'll be scrubbed, assigned uniforms, and sorted by gender. Families are split. Children rarely see their parents again. Emotional trauma comes free of charge. One curious fringe detail is that some workhouses employed parrot feeders. These were people tasked with giving breadcrumbs to a single exotic bird kept for the amusement of visiting benefactors. You're not sure whether to laugh or weep. You slip in through a side door. Nobody stops you. You must look poor enough. Inside, it's all stone floors and hushed efficiency. Workers boil potatoes in massive iron vats, and the smell is enough to make you swear off starch. You glance into the infirmary and see rows of cots. A priest reads last rites over someone who probably just wanted a second blanket. You hear coughing from every direction. Always coughing. You catch the eye of a woman folding linens. Her hands are cracked and red, but her posture is stubbornly proud. She offers a tight smile, as if to say, "Yes, it's awful. But I'm not dead yet." You nod back, unsure whether you're comforting her or yourself. The concept of the deserving poor echoes around you. Victorians love this distinction. If you work hard, stay moral, and accept your station, you're noble. If you drink, protest, or show a shred of dignity, you're a threat. It's all very inspiring in a profoundly condescending way. Historians still debate whether workhouses were truly intended to help the destitute or simply to punish poverty into submission. Either way, you don't linger. Outside, the world feels too bright. You blink like a mole, disoriented. The street smells like roast chestnuts and dead dreams. Your stomach growls. Fortunately, there's street food. Sort of. You approach a vendor with a tray strapped to his chest. He's selling hot eels. That's not a joke. These are real, gelatinous, wiggly eels, chopped and stewed in parsley sauce. You nod politely and move on. Maybe later, instead, you go for a slice of peas pudding wrapped in paper. It tastes like someone blended peas with wallpaper paste, then dared you to like it. You chew slowly, imagining it might grow on you. It does not. You follow the scent of something vaguely meaty and end up near Smithfield Market. It's a loud, bustling arena of meat. Pigs hang like damp laundry. Cattle are herded through tight pens. Butchers wield cleavers with theatrical flair. You duck to avoid a flying haunch. No one apologizes. A man with blood on his apron offers you a slice of tongue. You consider running. Instead, you nod and accept. To your surprise, it's edible. Salty, tender, and disturbingly satisfying, Victorian food culture is resourceful. Nose to tail wasn't trendy. It was survival. You'd eat lark pie if it meant an extra hour of warmth in your belly. One peculiar tidbit, there was a brief craze for glow-in-the-dark sweets, glazed with uranium salts. Children loved them. Parents were less informed. As you gnaw the last bite of tongue, a man next to you asks if you've ever tried fried cow heel. You haven't. He grins like a salesman. It jiggles when you bite it. Like pudding with a grudge. You suddenly remember you're not hungry anymore. You drift away from the market, clutching your stomach and your thoughts. Every bite, every room, every brick feels saturated with survival. There's a rhythm to the city now, a strange hum under the chaos. Maybe it's the ever-present footfall. Maybe it's just in your head. But it beats on. Resolute, grubby, oddly comforting, London isn't just a place you live through, it's a place that lives through you. You drift along Fleet Street, the air thick with ink, ambition, and something fishy wafting from a nearby tavern. Here, words rule the world. Not noble swords or royal decree, but the click-clack of printing presses and the bark of over-caffeinated editors hurling insults at underpaid apprentices. Welcome to the beating heart of Victorian media. The buildings huddle tightly, as if eavesdropping on the next scandal. Narrow staircases lead to smoky offices stacked to the rafters with papers, pamphlets, and very tired men. Occasionally, a harried clerk shouts "Stop the presses," though, from the look of it, the presses rarely stop for anything short of fire. You slip into one of the print houses. No one notices. Everyone's too busy. Compositors move with astonishing speed, arranging metal type backwards and upside down. The lead blocks click into rows, inked, pressed, and stacked. Every word feels urgent, even if it's just an ad for mustache wax. The ink smudges your fingers. You feel journalistic now. Victorian newspapers are booming. This is the dawn of mass media, when industrial presses and rising literacy turn news into a commodity. Papers cost a penny, hence the term penny dreadfuls. They're cheap, sensational, and often bloody. Perfect bedtime reading. You glance at today's headlines: horrid murder in Whitechapel, arsenic in the milk again. New comet to doom us all. No slow news days here. But not all is dread. There's humor, serialized novels, advice columns, even weather predictions, though Victorian meteorologists often relied more on guesswork than science. Historians still argue whether readers believed the weather reports or just used them to line bird cages. A wiry editor, his mustache drooping like a wilted fern, waves a cigar in your face and demands your opinion on the latest Charles Dickens installment. You nod solemnly. Very tragic. He scoffs. They're all tragic. He's not wrong. Speaking of Dickens, Fleet Street was once his turf. You walk past a plaque marking where his office stood. You can almost feel his ghost tooting behind you, possibly judging your lack of pocket watch. From printing presses to pamphleteers, you're watching public opinion take shape. The media here doesn't just inform, it sways. Political cartoons lampoon the aristocracy. Articles call for reform. Some writers risk jail time for their columns. Freedom of the press isn't a guaranteed right, it's an ongoing brawl. One of the more fringe features you find in the back of a rag, reports from the spirit world. It's a weekly column summarizing what mediums claim dead people have to say about current events. Spoiler, they're mostly disappointed. You duck into a reading room, a place where even the illiterate pretend to be scholars. Papers are spread out on long tables, and a group of men argue about tariffs with theatrical hand gestures. One woman reads aloud softly from a moralistic novella, and no one dares interrupt. Her voice is surprisingly steady for someone who can't afford shoes. Evening descends. Gaslights flicker to life. You watch lamplighters make their rounds, long poles in hand, sparking each lamp like a tiny constellation. The shadows shift, and suddenly London is theatrical, part noir mystery, part fever dream, you pass a newsboy hawking late editions. His voice cracks, extra. Extra. Rats invade pub. You don't know if it's true. But you'd read it anyway. Your next stop, Covent Garden, where stories become something more performative. Here, the cobblestones sparkle under lamplight and the smell of roasted chestnuts mingles with rosewater perfume. Street performers twirl flaming batons while opera singers belt arias beside mimes pretending to die of cholera. It's delightfully chaotic. Theaters rise on every side, tall, proud buildings with gold leaf signs and velvet curtain box seats. You duck into one, pretending to be someone's cousin. No one questions you. Inside, the atmosphere is giddy. Candles flicker in chandeliers, and the crowd buzzes with anticipation. Ladies adjust their gloves. Gentlemen discuss the acoustics. Somewhere, someone sneezes in iambic pentameter. The show begins. It's a melodrama, of course. The heroine faints every 10 minutes. The villain twirls his mustache like it owes him money. The crowd boos, cheers, and occasionally throws things. You start to suspect Victorian theatre had more in common with football than Shakespeare, behind the curtain. Things are less glamorous. Costumes are reused, wigs are itchy, and the lead actor is recovering from a suspiciously timed horse incident. But the show goes on. It always does. One quirky detail: during especially emotional scenes, some theaters would hire claqueurs, paid audience members who laugh, cry, or gasp on cue to stir up the crowd. Yes, Victorian peer pressure came with wages. After the final bow, the crowd spills into the street, debating plot holes and marriage proposals. You trail behind, still humming the main tune, something about forbidden love and conveniently timed inheritance, but your evening isn't over. You veer toward the music halls, which are less posh and more punchy. Here, the crowd's rowdier. There's beer. There are hecklers. There's a woman on stage singing about chimney sweeps while balancing a tankard on her head. She gets a standing ovation. Music halls are the variety shows of the Victorian world, with song, dance, comedy, and acrobatics all in one breathless blur. They cater to working-class audiences hungry for laughter after long days of toil. The jokes are cheeky, the skirts a little short, by 19th-century standards, and the energy contagious. One act involves a trained parrot who swears on command. Another features a man who plays God Save the Queen on a saw. You begin to wonder if modern TikTok owes these folks royalties. Historians still debate whether music halls uplifted or mocked the poor, but there's no question they were beloved. Even Queen Victoria is rumored to have attended in disguise. Possibly with popcorn. You leave the hall still chuckling. Your cheeks hurt from smiling, your legs ache from standing, and your soul, strangely, is a little lighter. For all its grime and grief, Victorian London knows how to laugh. Loudly. Often, you step into the night, the city's rhythm slowing but never silent. The papers, the players, the parodies, they are all part of this massive, soot-covered story engine. The streets don't sleep. They rehearse. Tomorrow, new scandals will break. New headlines will shriek. But for now, the city sighs into a moment of theatrical silence. You wake, or rather, drift further into your sleepy haze, to the sound of church bells tolling across the city. It's a Sunday morning, and even Victorian London slows down, just a little, just enough to pretend to rest. You follow the sound through the misty hush of early light, soot clinging gently to the rooftops like a shawl the city forgot to shake off. You're heading toward church, but not just any church. You're about to witness the most complicated, most choreographed, and debatably most uncomfortable social ritual in the city: Sunday service. In an age when sin and soot competed for dominance, attending church wasn't just for salvation. It was prime time for public performance. You join the procession of polished boots and stiff collars, of lace gloves and bonnets that look like flying saucers. A family walks ahead of you, their children scrubbed until their ears gleam like porcelain. A lady in morning black strides past. Her veil is so long she nearly trips on a coal scuttle. But no one laughs. Morning fashion is serious business. You step into the nave. The air is damp with incense, beeswax, and something else, maybe mildew. Your pew creaks ominously as you sit. Around you, the congregation arranges themselves in stiff, righteous rows. They are segregated not by belief, but by class. Even salvation has a seating chart. The front pews are reserved for the well-to-do. They've paid for the privilege, literally, in the form of pew rents. The back rows are free for the poor. You wonder if that means their prayers reach heaven a few seconds late. Historians still argue whether pew renting was a form of spiritual elitism or just a practical fundraiser. The vicar begins his sermon. His voice echoes off the high ceilings in a sing-song drone that could lull even the most pious into sleep. You're pretty sure you hear someone snoring by the organ. You glance around and realize it's the organist. Then come the hymns. You're handed a thick hymnal with type so small you'd need a microscope to sing along. The congregation rises, some proudly, some grudgingly, and a cacophony of off-key voices fills the space. It's both beautiful and painful, like a cat giving birth in a cathedral, but look past the droning and you'll see something deeper. For many in this congregation, this hour is the only peaceful moment in a chaotic week. It's where they hear about hope, about judgment, about the proper way to bake a wholesome seed cake without inviting the devil in. You spot a pamphlet tucked under the pew cushion. Its title, 10 Ways to Spot a Sinner. It's written by a woman named Mrs. Prudence Trundle and includes such red flags as untidy hair, humming secular music, and having opinions. You quietly tuck it back in place. Probably not the right time to challenge it. After the sermon, everyone files out into the churchyard, which doubles as both garden and graveyard. The Victorian approach to landscaping was pragmatic. The smell of turned earth and damp stone settles around you. The headstones tilt like tired sentinels. Some are so weathered the names are ghostly whispers. You pause by one monument shaped like a broken column. It's a symbol of a life cut short. Victorians were deeply symbolic in death. An urn draped in stone cloth represents sorrow. A lamb represents a child. A weeping willow speaks for itself. Nearby, a small group has gathered. They're not mourning. They're gossiping. Nothing gets the neighbors talking quite like death. Did you hear what she wore to the funeral? One woman says, adjusting her veil. Turquoise. Turquoise, a man mutters, serves her right. Her husband always looked half dead anyway. You tiptoe away. Even the dearly departed aren't safe from scandal. Next, you head to the park, which on Sundays transforms into a catwalk for Victorian virtue. Hyde Park or Regent's Park, take your pick. They're all variations on the same scene, promenading. You don't walk in the park. You promenade. Slowly. Deliberately. You're not going anywhere in particular. You're there to be seen. It's like social media, but with bonnets and blisters. Ladies teeter along gravel paths, corsets cinched so tightly they resemble upright coffins. Men pose by railings, trying to look both strong and indifferent. Children in sailor suits screech like seagulls. Nannies chase them with varying degrees of interest. The fashion parade is in full swing. Crinolines sweep through the grass like mini parachutes. Parasols spin like slow propellers. Top hats are adjusted every 3 minutes. A dog in a knitted vest lifts its leg on a marble statue, and no one dares scold it. The statue, you notice, is of Queen Victoria. Oops, some people take a turn on the boating lake. It's romantic, unless you're prone to seasickness or button too tightly to row. A pair of young lovers paddle in awkward silence, glancing at each other like they've forgotten why courtship exists. One gentleman tries to impress a lady with a story about seeing the Queen's carriage once. She yawns. He tries again with an anecdote involving a French mime and a swan. She nods, but her eyes wander to the man with the spaniel and the better jawline. You pass a group playing cricket. The players look like they've wandered out of a wedding reception and into a field by mistake. One batsman swings, misses, and his hat flies off. A cheer erupts. You're not sure who's winning, but the commentary is divine, a quirky tidbit, some wealthier ladies hire walkers. These are male companions paid to escort them through the park and engage in clever conversation. Think of it as polite escort service with fewer lawsuits. As the afternoon sun slides behind soot-stained clouds, the promenade winds down. People peel off toward tea rooms, clutching their dignity and parasols. A few sit on benches, fanning themselves with newspapers or discussing moral decay in novels. You feel a bit more rested. A bit more entertained. You've witnessed not just worship, but performance. Not just fashion, but theater. Everything in Victorian society, it seems, is layered. Beliefs stitched into rituals. Manners wrapped around secrets. And a corset beneath every conversation. The city quiets slightly as dinner hour nears. The bells chime again. You turn your collar up against the wind. It's time to head indoors, where the next ritual awaits. It's the Victorian meal, where the knives are silver, and the judgments are sharper. The clatter of plates, the scent of roasting meat, and the soft glow of candlelight draw you into a Victorian dining room, a stage set for its own kind of drama. Here, meals are not just about sustenance but about status, etiquette, and, if you're lucky, a little bit of scandal. You slide into a high-backed chair, its velvet cushion worn thin from decades of polite but firm sitting. The table is laid with heavy silverware, delicate china, and linen napkins starched so stiff they practically stand upright like soldiers. The centerpiece is a silver tureen, steam rising in lazy spirals like the fog outside. Dinner in Victorian London could stretch on for hours. Courses parade by like royalty: soup, fish, meat, vegetables, pudding, and then, if you haven't lost your appetite or your mind, a final flourish of cheeses and fruits. Your host explains the importance of pacing yourself. No Victorian wants to be the one who licks their plate or, worse, requests seconds. Decorum rules all. You pick up your napkin. Never, ever wipe your mouth with your hand. The butler reminds you discreetly. You dab delicately at your lips. Remember the stiff collars and crinolines from the park. Good luck trying to eat without turning your fancy outfit into a casualty zone, and watch your elbows. In Victorian etiquette, elbows belong firmly off the table. Any violation invites withering glances that could chill your blood better than a London fog. Midway through the meal, a servant quietly places a plate before you, jellied eels. You stare at the glistening mound, remembering that peculiar London delicacy. No, it's not a dessert gone wrong. It's exactly what it sounds like: eels cooked and set in a gelatinous broth. Some swear by it. Others suspect it's a secret test of courage. Historians still argue whether jellied eels were a staple born of poverty or an acquired culinary taste among Londoners. Conversation bubbles around you. Topics range from politics to the latest novel by Dickens, whose gritty depictions of the city have both fans and critics. You catch a snippet about the Great Exhibition, that dazzling 1851 showcase of innovation. Some say it defined Victorian pride. Others grumble it was little more than a spectacle to distract from the city's grime. You take a bite of roast beef, tender and dripping with gravy, and suddenly a curious sensation hits you. It's hard to tell if it's the food or the atmosphere, but you feel a strange mix of fullness and claustrophobia. Victorian dining rooms were often cramped. The wealthy preferred intimacy over space. Perhaps it made their social circles seem tighter. Or maybe it helped trap secrets more efficiently. A young lady at the table discreetly fans herself with a lace fan. Her cheeks are flushed, Not just from the heat but from the tangle of unspoken desires and social constraints swirling in the room. Victorian dinners were arenas for subtle power plays. Who sat next to whom, who poured the wine, who avoided whose gaze, each detail was a signal in a complex dance. Here's a quirky snippet. Victorians believed certain foods could affect your morality. Eating too many sweets, for example, was thought to weaken your willpower and lead to moral decay. That might explain the elaborate desserts designed to be admired more than devoured. You try to picture the kitchen below, where cooks labor in smoky heat, their faces streaked with sweat and soot. The stark contrast between the opulence above and the grit below is a hallmark of Victorian society. It's an era of extremes stitched together with fine linen and soot. Toward the end of the meal, you're served a plum pudding. It's dense and rich, traditionally steamed for hours. Often doused in brandy and flambéed tableside, it becomes a fiery spectacle that could either impress guests or set the tablecloth on fire. You watch as the flames flicker, casting shadows on faces both eager and wary. As you finish your meal, you notice the carefully folded serviettes and the polished silver gleaming in the candlelight. The Victorian meal is a lesson in patience, performance, and, above all, appearances. Even the food carries a message. Modesty is required in public. Abundance is displayed in private. Historians still argue whether Victorian dining customs were a genuine expression of refinement or an elaborate facade masking the city's darker realities. Poverty, pollution, and inequities all linger just beyond the polished glassware. You lean back, grateful that you survived without spilling gravy on your cravat or committing a social faux pas that would haunt you in polite company. The evening shadows stretch longer. As you rise, you know there's one last Victorian ritual to face before you can call it a day. It's the evening walk, or as some called it, the airing. Now it's time to breathe in the fog once more and contemplate the city's secrets under the gaslit sky. The heavy front door creaks shut behind you, and you step once more into the damp, glimmering embrace of Victorian nightfall. Your boots tap softly against the cobblestones as you set off on what society calls an evening airing. It sounds lovely, gentle, even healthful. But let's be honest. This is less a refreshing stroll and more a ritualized battle with the city itself. A gas lamp flickers overhead, its pale yellow glow casting dramatic shadows along the narrow streets. You pull your coat tighter. Not because it's particularly cold, though the air does nip at your cheeks, but because you've been warned. Victorian London at night isn't just mysterious. It's alive with movement. With whispers, with people who have nowhere else to go. This is not the romanticized night walk of moonlit poetry. It is the practical, paranoid shuffle of a citizen who knows pickpockets love dusk. You're hyper-aware of every bootstep behind you, every sudden gust that rattles a sign or swings a shutter. Still, there's beauty in the gloom. Fog curls like cat tails around corners, the kind of theatrical mist that would make Sherlock Holmes proud. And indeed, his creator Arthur Conan Doyle drew on these very streets. Their eerie hush and unpredictable character inspired his tales. Historians still argue whether London's fog was more myth than meteorology, exaggerated by writers or a real menace spawned by coal smoke and humidity. You pass a pair of gentlemen tipping their hats to a lady. Her gloved hand is looped through a parasol despite the absence of sun. Social grace doesn't take evenings off, apparently. Further down, two women hurry by, their shawls drawn high. Not from cold, but from caution. The city's split personality emerges after dark. It is half charm, half menace. You stop to observe a lamplighter. He's perched precariously on a small ladder, taper in hand, reawakening another street lamp with a swift motion. These human beacons are slowly being replaced by mechanized timers. But for now, they remain. Silhouettes against an amber sky, briefly glorious in their relevance. Down a side alley, the scent changes. There is less smoke and more rot. You've entered the less pristine part of town, the bit they don't etch into family portraits. Here, a cat darts across your path, then another. They say the feral cats of London knew more city secrets than the police ever would. A newspaper vendor coughs loudly, hawking the latest scandal. You glance at the headline. It says something about a local murder, but also includes an article condemning improper corset wear. The Victorians balanced death and modesty on the same page. Of course they did. Let's talk safety. Or the illusion of it. You pass a peeler, an early police officer named after Sir Robert Peel, who established the Metropolitan Police. His top hat is tall, his presence at least slightly reassuring. Still, the concept of modern policing is so new that many Victorians distrust it. Some see peelers as useless figureheads. Others view them as creeping tools of government overreach. Historians still argue whether their early presence genuinely improved safety or merely symbolized it. You nod to the officer anyway, trying not to look like a criminal or a complainer. In Victorian London, those are occasionally the same thing. Turning onto a wider street, you pause before a gleaming window display. Gaslight flickers on polished silverware and porcelain dolls with disturbingly glassy eyes. You're standing in front of a luxury shop, closed for the evening but clearly flaunting its wares to both passers-by and potential thieves. The disparity between haves and have-nots is on full display, wrapped in velvet and reflected in crystal. Across the street, a boarding house buzzes with murmurs and distant piano music. This, too, is Victorian nightlife. Not just danger, but quiet rituals. A cup of tea before bed, a novel read by candlelight, a whispered laugh that will never make it into history books. You pass a theater. Its posters are peeling at the corners. Shakespeare is in vogue again. Some things never go out of style. But mixed in with the classics are music halls, where the real nightly chaos happens. Inside, raucous songs, innuendos, and clapping drown out any sense of Victorian restraint. It's a different world in there. One you might be tempted to enter. But not tonight. You're already steeped in enough London for one evening. Here's a quirky tidbit. To avoid stepping into unsavory muck on your nightly walk, some wealthier Londoners carried a stick specifically for poking the ground ahead. Not for protection. Just to check the pavement's stability. Imagine casually probing for sewer leaks before reaching the pub. At the next corner, a young boy offers you a paper flower. You hesitate. It's not a gift. It's for sale. Flower sellers, many of them children, are a common sight at this hour. They cling to the last gasps of foot traffic before heading home to sleep in stairwells or under bridges. You buy one. Not out of charity. Okay, yes, entirely out of charity. And because it's hard to say no to a kid in ragged shoes when you're wearing gloves stitched by candlelight, you feel it now, the quiet weight of the city. Victorian London at night is like a stage after the actors leave. It is dim, echoing, full of mysterious props left behind. It's beautiful and terrible. Grimy and glorious, you loop back toward home. A few wisps of fog chasing your heels. The streets begin to empty. The bustle settles. Lamps burn steadily, but their glow grows more mournful with each passing minute. You're no longer walking to see the city. You're walking to leave it behind, if only until morning. In Victorian London, sleep isn't just a break. It is survival. The shutters rattle as you step back inside. The door latches with a soft clunk, muffling the city's distant clamor, and for a moment, the house exhales with you. You didn't die on your walk. That alone feels like a win in Victorian London. The hallway's candle sputters faintly as you peel off gloves that are only fashionable if you don't mind slight frostbite. A clock chimes somewhere deeper in the house. It's one of those grand mahogany things with an hourly whine. It's bedtime, technically. But as anyone alive in this century knows, bed is not a universally restful idea. You ascend the stairs slowly. The banister is cool and polished under your palm. Upstairs, the world becomes quieter still. But it's not peace. It's a kind of silence that listens. You pass closed doors. The hush behind them is thick with dreams, prayers, or indigestion. Upstairs parlors. Spare rooms. A faint snore from the governess's chamber. You think she dreams in Latin, given how she lectures during breakfast. Finally, you arrive at your own room. Or more likely, if you're renting by the week, your modest square of territory in a shared lodging house. It smells of old wood, starch, and a hopeful amount of lavender. The wallpaper curls in one corner like it's trying to escape the century. Your bed frame creaks in protest as you sit. It's a wrought iron relic with springs that don't spring so much as sulk. You reach for the hot water bottle at the foot of the bed, the poor man's miracle on a cold night. If you're lucky, someone remembered to fill it. If not, at least the bedbugs will be warm. Now comes the unromantic bit. Getting into bed in Victorian London isn't a simple flop into feathers affair. First, you light a candle stub. Not a whole candle, heavens no. They're pricey. This one's been burned down so far it's practically sentimental. You strip layer by layer. Jacket, waistcoat, blouse. Corset if you're female. Long drawers if you're male. Possibly both if you're a fashion-forward ghost. Beneath it all, nightclothes. Flannel. Always flannel. Victorian sleepwear is not about seduction. It's about not freezing to death. Once dressed for bed, you may check your chamber pot. Yes, the indoor porcelain solution to nighttime needs. Fancy homes might hide it in a cabinet or under the bed. Less fancy ones do not. In colder months, these become literal ice buckets by dawn. Romantic, isn't it? Let's talk about beds. Even middle-class Victorians usually sleep in shared quarters. Siblings bunk together. Spouses cling for warmth. Boarders make polite truces over blankets. You might share with a cousin. Or a stranger. It depends on what's affordable, and don't forget the layers. Mattress stuffed with straw or horsehair. Then sheets. A thick wool blanket, maybe two, and then a coverlet. Historians still argue whether people actually slept under all that or just vanished entirely until spring. The pillow is thin but determined. You lie back, squinting at the flicker of your candle as it flutters and then dies. Darkness settles like velvet and your senses shift inward, then you hear it, the creak, not yours, the step. Possibly the stairs. Possibly your imagination. You freeze. Not out of fear, really. But habit. Every Victorian home has its symphony of nocturnal noises. Beams contracting. Cats fighting. Pipes moaning. Someone sleep reciting psalms. But there's always that one sound too deliberate to dismiss. You lie still. Eyes open in the dark. Waiting. But it fades. Or you tune it out, time to reflect. Because what else are you going to do before sleep? Tonight, you learn that bedtime isn't a finish line in Victorian London. It's a ritual with steps, drama, and sometimes actual steps outside your door. Did you know some Victorians believed sleeping north to south improved blood flow? Or that children were warned against sleeping with their mouths open for fear of inhaling night vapors? One particularly persistent theory claimed dreams could leak out if your pillow wasn't firm enough. And don't even get them started on nightmares. They were practically a medical condition. There's also the odd quirk of segmented sleep. Historians now believe many Victorians didn't sleep straight through the night. Instead, they dozed for a few hours, woke in the wee hours for reading, prayer, or letters, and then drifted back into a second sleep. Imagine waking at 2 a.m. to knit. It's charming until you try it. You shift under the covers, listening again. It's quieter now. Just the tick of that overzealous clock and the sigh of wind against your window. From your bed, you can see the soft orange halo of a distant gas lamp. It's not bright enough to illuminate. But it reminds you you're not alone. Someone else, somewhere, is also trying to sleep in flannel and wondering if the hot water bottle has a leak. You think of the coal smoke curling above rooftops. Of lamplighters finishing their final rounds. Of chimney sweeps who dream in soot. You think of the lonely flower seller from earlier, hopefully curled in a doorway with coins clutched in her fist. London doesn't sleep. Not really. But you can try. That's the best anyone can do here. As you settle deeper into the mattress, you can almost feel the city exhale. A massive, smoky yawn stretching from Whitechapel to Kensington. Your eyelids begin to grow heavy, though your mind hums like the echo of a late-night carriage. It's in these moments that Victorian London feels almost tender. Like it's trying to apologize for itself. For the filth, and the fear, and the chronic lack of insulation. And maybe that's enough for tonight. Tomorrow, you'll wake to a damp floorboard. Weak tea. The noise of street sellers beginning again, but for now, in this pause between chiming hours, you sleep. Your breath settles into a slow rhythm, but sleep, like the elusive cat on the roof across the way, continues to evade you. The mattress feels lumpier than you remembered, and there's a persistent crinkle from the straw ticking that makes it sound like someone is reading a very angry newspaper beneath you. So, you do what many Victorians do during this first sleep wakefulness. You lie there and listen. The house murmurs in the dark. A board creaks. A mouse skitters behind the wainscot. Somewhere, the faint sound of water dripping suggests a leak no one plans to fix. Insomnia is as Victorian as top hats and sideburns. You might not even call it that, of course. It's just the watchful hour. Some people embrace it. You, however, start to think of everything that could go wrong tomorrow. The mind is cruel that way, especially at 3 a.m., in this strange interval. Many Londoners get up. They light a stub of candle, pull on a robe, and perhaps pen a letter or two. The post is reliable, if not quick, and writing feels productive in the still of the night. Others pray, read the Bible, or more curiously, pop next door for a night visit with a neighbor. Yes, it was completely normal to socialize a little before that elusive second sleep kicked in. You resist the urge to rise. Too cold. Instead, your thoughts meander. You think of the lodger downstairs. The one who always smells faintly of vinegar and never quite makes eye contact. What does he dream about? You hope it's something innocuous, like cheese. The candle is a stub, but you strike a match anyway. Just to see. The light flickers against the chamber's low ceiling. Shadows stretch and contort like circus acrobats, if those acrobats were also extremely cold and possibly haunted. It's beautiful in a strange way. The quiet intimacy of your own breath and the trembling glow of a century-long past. Now, let's talk about beds again. Specifically, something called the marriage bed. It's not what you're thinking. In Victorian times, these were grand beds passed down through generations. Some were carved with enough flourish to make the Sistine Chapel jealous. But they weren't necessarily comfortable. Think of something creaky, enormous, and likely home to at least 3 types of insect life. Couples often slept in the same room but in separate beds. That's right. Together but apart. Romantic? Debatable. Efficient? Perhaps. Historians still argue whether this separation was based on etiquette, hygiene, or simply because people snored like dying geese. But what if you're poor? Then forget all that luxury. You might be sleeping on a straw pallet on the floor, with family members stacked like sardines in a tin. Privacy becomes a concept as fictional as dragons. At least dragons had their own caves, and here's a curious thing: feather beds. Soft, luxurious, and status symbolic, but horribly impractical. They trapped heat, moisture, and sometimes entire ecosystems. But they looked good in front of guests. That's Victorian living, all about the illusion of comfort. Suddenly, a dog barks from somewhere down the lane. Then another. Chain reaction. It's like an 1850s canine group chat. Someone's probably stumbling home from the pub, weaving poetry into the gutter. Or maybe it's the night soil man again. You never quite get used to the sound of a full bucket being dragged down cobblestones. Now the candle's gone. You lie back again, the room plunged into that soft, smothering darkness. The kind that makes you very aware of your eyelashes. You're not the only sleepless soul in the city. Somewhere, a doctor studies his medical texts by lamplight. A midwife runs down a frosted street toward a birth. A writer dips a pen into ink and wonders if anyone will ever read his pages. Spoiler, if he's Dickens, then yes. If he's named Hubert Tillingham Smythe, perhaps not. Let's indulge in a quirky little tidbit. Some Victorians believed sleeping with a raw onion under your pillow could ward off illness. Others opted for camphor sachets, which made you smell like a pharmacy during a flood. Or, less charming, a flannel cloth soaked in vinegar and tied around the neck. Good luck sleeping with that fashion statement. Of course, if you're very fashionable, your insomnia might be blamed on your nerves. The catch-all diagnosis for everything from grief to indigestion. Remedies ranged from laudanum, a charming mix of alcohol and opium, to electrotherapy. Yes, they shocked your scalp in the name of sleep. Unsurprisingly, historians still argue whether any of this helped or just gave people a dramatic reason to faint in drawing rooms. The hours pass. You drift somewhere between waking and dreaming, replaying memories that may or may not be yours. A summer picnic. The smell of damp books. That time you saw a man eat a whole pie without chewing. It's strange what floats to the surface. Outside, the blackness begins to fade ever so slightly. There's a silvering to the edge of the world. Morning approaches. You've survived the night. Or, more precisely, you've endured it. You hear movement. Boots scuffing. Someone pours water into a kettle. Downstairs, Mrs. Clench coughs herself awake. These are the city's morning bells, not sung, but scraped and wheezed into being. You sit up slowly, groaning in protest. You made it to dawn. Congratulations, London hasn't killed you. Yet. The light is soft now, but insistent. Not the kind that welcomes you with warmth, but the kind that nudges you. First politely, then with increasing urgency, until you swing your legs out of bed and let your feet touch the cold floorboards. It's morning in Victorian London, and you're expected to contribute to society whether or not your joints agree. If you're lucky enough to have a chamber pot, you begin your day with the deeply humbling experience of balancing, bracing, and hoping gravity is on your side. If you're not so lucky, that's what alleys and shared outhouses are for. The cold water in the wash basin is an early insult. It slaps your face with the force of 1,000 tiny knives. There is no central heating here, no warm steam, just your own shivering resolve and a ragged towel that smells faintly of mildew and courage. You tug on your clothes. More layers than fashion, fewer than comfort requires. Your shirt collar is stiff with starch, your boots are 2 sizes too tight, and your hat is perched with the sort of desperation that says, "I tried." But you're dressed, and that means you're ready to face the day. Now, breakfast. It's not exactly a feast. The lower classes start with bread, maybe a scrap of cheese if payday was recent, and weak tea served in a chipped mug that's been through more than one generation. If you're very poor, you might get dripping toast. A slice of bread soaked in the fat drippings from yesterday's meat. It's as unappealing as it sounds, but it fills the void. Meanwhile, the well-to-do dine on eggs, kidneys, kippers, and enough black pudding to alarm modern arteries. This is the full English, though back then, it was more like the full empire. Victorian breakfasts were protein-rich and class-loaded, designed to show your servants and God that you were thriving. Speaking of God, this is a society obsessed with piety. Morning prayers are standard in most households. You recite psalms in stiff unison, the words more rote than felt. Religion is not just a spiritual preference here, it's an expectation. Like brushing your teeth or avoiding eye contact with people who shout in the streets, and work awaits. Always, let's say you're middle class, working as a clerk in an office or shop. You trudge through the streets, dodging horse dung, puddles of mysterious origin, and the occasional vendor pushing eel pies on a wheeled cart. Your umbrella is more for social decorum than actual shelter. It's likely leaking from two seams and flaps like a disapproving crow in the wind. If you're working class or below, the commute is a gauntlet. Maybe you're a factory hand, walking miles in cracked shoes to punch in at a textile mill. Or a matchstick girl, heading into a warehouse where the air is thick with phosphorus and dreams go to die. Historians still argue whether child labor was a product of necessity or cruelty. Or both. Either way, you'll see children with soot-streaked faces operating machinery twice their size. Now here's a weird little fact. The Victorians believed that early rising was a moral imperative. The early bird catches the worm wasn't just a proverb, it was practically doctrine. If you weren't up and useful by 6 a.m., you were suspect. Lazy. Potentially on the road to vice and gin. Productivity was next to godliness, at least according to your grandmother and several pamphlets printed in Manchester, but let's not forget the street sweepers. Those quiet, unsung heroes who clear the roads of last night's mess before the respectable world awakens. Without them, London would be ankle-deep in mud, manure, and yesterday's regrets. Their brooms move in rhythmic strokes, brushing away evidence of the city's night crimes and gutter confessions. You make it to your workplace. It's a cramped room with gas lighting that flickers like a candle being judged. The windows are filthy. The air is dense with coal dust. And the man at the desk across from you coughs every 30 seconds like a metronome for misery. You sit. You write. You sort. You nod politely when your superior walks past. Work in Victorian London isn't always grueling, but it is always long. 10-hour days are normal. Breaks are brief. And you do it all in wool, which smells increasingly like a wet dog as the hours pass, and yet, there is pride. A strange, chest-tightening sort of pride in contributing to the machinery of empire. Whether you're sweeping floors or balancing ledgers. You're part of something. A society. A rhythm. A colossal, smoke-belching, overachieving beast called London. There's one odd distraction today. A man on the corner handing out pamphlets about phrenology, the pseudoscience of measuring skull bumps to determine character. According to his chart, you might be prone to melancholy and digestive ambition. You decline the reading, mostly because you're pretty sure he's using a soup ladle as a measuring tool. At noon, the street noise swells. Bells chime. Delivery boys shout. A man selling meat pies sings in a haunting falsetto, promising no rats this time. You're not convinced. Lunch, if you can afford it, might be taken in a corner shop. For the working class, it's a cold meat sandwich or a pie wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. Office workers might splurge on a steak and kidney pudding. Vegetables? What are those? For the upper crust, lunch is a social affair. Courses. Champagne. Idle gossip about someone's cousin who ran off to Italy with a violinist. It's a different world. One with linen napkins and the option to nap before tea. You, however, return to work with crumbs on your lapel and mild heartburn. And so the afternoon trudges on. Quill scratches. Boots echo in the hallway. A clock ticks so loudly you begin to suspect it resents you. Occasionally, a street organ plays outside, offering a brief waltz before dissolving back into the gray. The sky shifts. The light turns brass-colored. Day bends toward evening, and you wonder how you ever got used to this monotony. Then again, routine is comfort. Predictability. A soft prison, maybe, but one that offers structure, and structure, in Victorian London, is survival. You step outside, and London greets you again. Not with a smile, but with a gust of soot-laced wind and the screech of carriage wheels rounding corners too fast. It's the end of the workday, and the city is changing its clothes. The fog settles lower now, thick and familiar, curling around gas lamps and the collars of weary commuters. You tuck your chin into your coat. It's time to navigate the streets home, if you're lucky enough to have one. Evening in Victorian London is a balancing act between hustle and hush. For some, it's the gentle return to domestic order. A warm hearth, a pot of stew, and children dozing under patchwork quilts. For others, it's the beginning of a long shift in the city's less respectable quarters. You pass a pub. Dimly lit, rowdy, alive. The kind of place where secrets are traded faster than shillings. Inside, men with coal-dusted faces clutch their pints like lifelines. Someone belts out a sea shanty. Laughter erupts. You consider stepping in, but the smell of damp wool and spilled ale persuades you otherwise. Back on the street, a costermonger calls out to no one in particular, offering apples with more bruises than color. His barrow creaks, leaning under the weight of produce that saw better days last Tuesday. Still, it's dinner for someone, your stomach growls. A quick stop at a street stall earns you a meat pie and a burnt tongue. No one really knows what goes into these pies. Historians still argue whether they were mostly awful, mystery meats, or, depending on the vendor, whatever hadn't walked off by dusk. You don't ask. You chew. You move on. As you walk, the city hums with small dramas. A boy darts past you, clutching a pocket watch he likely didn't pay for. Behind him, a constable gives chase with all the breathless determination of a man who's had one too many shepherd's pies. Nearby, a woman scolds her husband over the price of lamp oil. A dog barks at a chimney sweep. Life, as always, brims with noise and soot. If you're of means, you're heading home to dinner served by gaslight in a dining room with proper cutlery and a servant or two. You'll eat roast beef, mashed potatoes, and perhaps a helping of suet pudding so dense it could double as a doorstop. Dessert? Spotted dick, if you're into raisins and euphemisms, but most don't dine. They eat. For the lower classes, dinner might be reheated porridge or soup thickened with yesterday's leftovers. Maybe a crust of bread soaked in broth. You're full enough to forget the ache, but not enough to feel indulgent. There's no luxury here. Just fuel, and now, for the strangest part of the evening, entertainment, the theater, darling. Yes, even in Victorian London. People crave distraction. You might attend a play. Shakespeare if you're cultured, farce if you're tired, or a melodrama complete with hissing villains and swooning heroines. Tickets range from pennies to pounds, depending on how close you want to be to the stage. Or how far from the pit. The pit is where the lower classes stand, packed shoulder to shoulder, breathing in each other's sweat and opinions. There's a lot of shouting. A lot of throwing. Tomatoes, usually. But occasionally something wetter. If you can't afford the theater, you might gather around a street performer. Fire eaters. Jugglers. The occasional contortionist squeezing herself into a wooden box while her assistant passes a hat. It's all delightfully distracting until someone in the crowd lifts your wallet. For the more refined, there are lectures. Yes, actual public talks on things like astronomy, anatomy, or the latest scandal in Parliament. You might hear a man explain the benefits of cold baths for spiritual clarity. Or a woman, rare but not unheard of, to talk about education reform. These lectures are oddly well attended, mostly because they're free and sometimes heated. Think of them as the TED Talks of 1857, minus microphones and with much worse dental hygiene. Oh, and for those of you with adventurous tastes, the evening hours in certain districts offer pleasures unmentionable in polite society. Brothels, opium dens, and private clubs cater to every vice. Not that you'd go. You're far too virtuous. Still, the red lanterns cast their glow, tempting anyone who's tired of starch-in sermons. You hear music drifting from a music hall. Part vaudeville, part cabaret, part unapologetic chaos. A woman in feathers sings a bawdy tune, and the audience roars. Here, the laughter is loud, the skirts are high, and the social rules are briefly suspended. Just for a few hours, by now, gaslights flicker across the city like timid fireflies. They hiss and glow, casting long, wobbly shadows across cobblestones and brick. The lamplighter has done his rounds. Each post ignited by hand, with a pull and a flame. It's a quiet magic, this human touch to illumination, and then comes home. If you have one, you duck into your room. Perhaps it's a boarding house, shared with 3 snorers and 1 man who talks in his sleep about cricket. Or perhaps it's your own little flat above a tailor shop, filled with the smell of fabric and pipe tobacco. Either way, you light a candle, shuck off your boots, and stretch your aching feet. The day settles on your shoulders like dust. You breathe out. Some nights, you read. Maybe a penny dreadful. Those cheaply printed, deliciously lurid stories about murderers, monsters, and mayhem. You probably shouldn't, especially if you're prone to nightmares, but the prose is addictive and the cliffhangers cruel. Or maybe you write in your journal something about the weather, or the neighbor who keeps feeding pigeons from his window like he's training them for war. Finally, it's time for bed. If you're lucky, there's hot water for a wash. If not, you settle for being Victorian clean, which is to say, not actively muddy. You climb into bed, pull the thin blankets over your shoulders, and listen to the sounds of London at night. Hoofbeats. Distant whistles. A cat fight. Or perhaps 2 humans arguing over a bottle, and just as your eyelids begin to lower, you hear the unmistakable creak of a floorboard. Was it the wind? A ghost? Your imagination. You pull the blanket up to your nose. Sleep in Victorian London doesn't come easily. But when it does, it's a blessed, exhausted, dreamless thing. Morning returns with no regard for how little sleep you managed. The city doesn't wait for your rest. It shoves you upright with the same clammy hands it used yesterday. Smoke, sound, and something dripping somewhere that shouldn't be dripping at all. Your eyes open to the same cracked ceiling, the same threadbare curtain, the same faint mildew scent clinging to the corners of everything. You might wonder, briefly, how the aristocracy wakes up. Perhaps with sunlight streaming through lace, a tray of breakfast beside the bed, and a servant murmuring something pleasant in Latin. You, however, wake up with a start, a cough, and a shoe falling off the shelf you thought was sturdy. Breakfast, if you can afford it, is a slice of toast blackened at the edges, a smear of marmalade, made mostly of sugar and hope, and weak tea brewed so many times the leaves have unionized. The city is already alive when you step outside again. But not in a cheerful, let's take on the world way. It feels more like a stampede of people just trying to survive it. Chimney sweeps clatter down the street, soot already staining their faces like war paint. Milkmen rattle by with clinking bottles. Somewhere a flower girl arranges violets and primroses with surprising tenderness, despite fingers red from cold, and then there's the paperboy, bellowing headlines that range from mildly alarming to wildly inaccurate. Murder in Whitechapel. Head found, body missing. Queen Victoria spotted smiling. City in shock. New scientist claims moon is made of coal dust. You buy a paper anyway. It's entertainment as much as information, and it's cheaper than a novel. Depending on your class and gender, your day might be very different now. If you're a middle-class clerk, you trudge to the office, where you'll spend the next 10 hours writing the same numbers into the same ledger, day after day, until your soul quietly slips out the window. Your boss wears a bowler hat 2 sizes too small and believes shouting is a form of communication. You take your lunch standing up, in the alley, because there's no time for anything else. If you're a governess, your day is spent wrangling the offspring of people wealthier than you. And yet, they still feel entitled to criticize your handwriting, manners, and marital status. You teach them piano, elocution, and history, while trying to ignore the fact that their parents treat you as somewhere between a chair and a scandal waiting to happen. If you're a maid, your morning begins before dawn and ends, well, never. You scrub, polish, fetch, serve, curtsy, and vanish. You are a ghost in your employer's home, visible only when something is dirty or out of place. You sleep in the attic, eat in the kitchen, and dream of very little because you're too tired to dream, and if you're part of the upper crust, congratulations. Your day involves calling cards, corsets, letters sealed with wax, and discussing opera as if it matters more than the rising price of coal. You may attend a fitting, plan a garden party, or oversee the carving of a roast you won't personally touch. Your children are being raised by someone else. Your husband is likely having an affair. But at least you don't have to boil your own bathwater. Now, if you happen to be none of the above, perhaps a writer, a pickpocket, or a woman with an umbrella and an agenda, you spend the day weaving between these worlds. Watching, listening, learning. London is full of corners and cracks, and those who slip between them are often the ones with the most interesting stories. Some spend the day at libraries, like the British Museum reading room. It is a cathedral of knowledge that smells like paper and pipe smoke. There, philosophers rub elbows with poets, scientists, and the occasional fraud posing as all three. If you sit quietly enough, you can hear history happening in the margins. Others spend the day dodging debts. It's practically a sport. Ducking behind barrels, sweet-talking the butcher, offering to pay tomorrow for bread today. Some even change their names more often than their shirts. London is forgiving that way, as long as you don't owe the wrong kind of people, and always, always, the river runs through it all. The Thames, murky and unbothered, carries secrets and sewage side by side. Sometimes it spits up a boot, or a body, or a boat that shouldn't be floating at all. But no one looks too closely. That's the unspoken rule. London only makes sense if you don't stare. By the time late afternoon rolls around, you've already lived enough for 3 lifetimes. The sun, when visible, begins its lazy descent behind chimneys and spires. Shadows stretch. Lamps are lit again. The city sighs. And you prepare to do it all over again, because in Victorian London, routine is a form of survival, but deep in the alleys and up in the rooftops, there's something else stirring. A whisper of change. A flicker of rebellion. A new idea scribbled hastily in a notebook. A woman walking alone after dark, not afraid. A boy reading Darwin by candlelight, questioning everything. This isn't just the past. It's the seed of something bigger, and you. You're part of it, whether you like it or not. Welcome to another day in Victorian London. You find yourself walking slower as the light slips from the streets. It isn't just the fatigue in your limbs. It's the city itself. London after dark wears a different face, like a hostess switching into black velvet for an evening soiree. Except this velvet smells like horse manure and smog. Evening in Victorian London is a curious blend of restraint and release. By day, everyone pretends to follow the rules. At night, the city lets out a sigh, loosens its corset strings, and shows you where the real stories happen. Lamps flicker to life one by one, lit by boys barely taller than their torches. You pass them methodically climbing lampposts, lighting gas jets with quick snaps. Little stars are forced into place by tired hands. Historians still argue whether this shift to gaslight made London more romantic or just more flammable. Both are probably true. You hear the clatter of heels on cobblestones. Some rush to catch the last omnibus, others stroll slowly, dressed for pleasure, not work. The air thickens with pipe smoke, roasted chestnuts, and the slightly sour promise of ale. If you're middle class, you're expected to head home after your day's duties. Dinner is served precisely at 6 p.m., not a minute later. The roast may be overcooked, the potatoes boiled to mush, but etiquette is the true entree. Conversations tiptoe around politics and passion unless someone's had too much sherry. Meanwhile, in the working-class districts, meals are simpler and rules looser. Soup kitchens buzz with chatter, and if you're lucky, a stew thick enough to chew. Children chase rats for fun and sometimes dinner. And behind the pub, a fiddler plays a tune so fast your heart stumbles to keep up, but the night is far from over. Now enter the pleasure economy. That's what they're calling it. Those who write about things they've never done use that phrase. The rest just call it making ends meet. You pass taverns where men shout over card games and women dance for pennies. The beer flows like brown waterfalls, and the walls themselves seem to sweat from heat and breath. You could lose your week's wages here. Or your teeth. Depending on your luck, and then there are the theaters. Lavish, opulent, dramatic in every sense. You might squeeze into the gallery, high above the stage where the cheap seats sway and creak with every laugh. Or maybe you're in the stalls, close enough to see the actresses' tears and wonder whether they're real. Tonight's program, a melodrama involving a lost child, a found inheritance, and at least one scene where someone faints on a chaise lounge. You've seen it before. But that doesn't stop you from crying. Outside, things get stranger. You notice a woman in feathers and lace leaning against a lamppost. She smiles with one side of her mouth, bored and inviting. She's a lady of the night. Though most nights aren't very ladylike. It's estimated that over 80,000 prostitutes worked in London during the Victorian era. Some by choice. Most by desperation, but even in vice, there's hierarchy. The parlor girls work in brothels with velvet drapes and polite doormen. They might even have regulars. The street walkers, though, work under bridges, behind graveyards, or in stairwells that echo with every breath. Disease, violence, and judgment are their companions. Still, don't mistake them for passive victims. Many are sharp, savvy, and twice as well-read as the men they serve. One, famously, quoted Shakespeare during a police raid right before kicking an inspector in the shin. Scholars debate endlessly whether Victorian London was more sexually repressed or just better at pretending. Evidence leans toward the latter. Beneath the layers of lace and moralizing sermons, desire surged like the Thames in flood season. You wander past a bookseller's stall that's still open, lantern flickering. You spot copies of The Pearl, an infamous underground erotic magazine disguised as poetry. And yes, someone is haggling over a volume of natural anatomy that is absolutely not for scientific study, but it's not all sin and silliness. There's danger here too. The darker corners of London hum with unsolved crimes. Just ask the peeler walking his beat. That's what they call the early policeman, named after Sir Robert Peel. You see one now, tapping his truncheon idly, eyes scanning the alleys. He's underpaid, undertrained, and generally unpopular. Many Londoners still think of the police as an intrusive nuisance rather than protectors. Still, they're better than the gangs. From Whitechapel to Lambeth, you hear whispers of the scuttlers. Youth gangs with signature scarves and inexplicable pride in their ability to punch teeth loose. Turf wars erupt over things as trivial as stolen apples or stare-downs that lasted 1 second too long. Even the penny gaffes, those working-class night theaters, can become battlegrounds if the wrong two lads meet in the queue. Fights break out over insults, over girls, over politics, and once, allegedly, over whether Dickens or Thackeray was the superior novelist. No one won that fight. Except the doctor who stitched them all back up. As you reach the edge of the city's heart, the streets widen and quieten. Here lie the mansions of the truly wealthy, where candles glow behind thick curtains and the clocks tick in perfect harmony. These people live above the noise, almost outside time. Their nights are filled with dinner parties, recitations, and brandy sipped so slowly you wonder whether it ever reaches their lips, and yet, even here, you feel the pulse of the same city beneath your feet, because London doesn't really sleep. Not fully. It naps in shifts, murmurs in its cradle of fog and firelight. And as the moon lifts above chimneys and steeples, you realize, this is the time when the stories start, so keep walking. Softly now. Something is waiting just around the bend. You cross the threshold into one of London's most bewildering spectacles, the Victorian Insane Asylum. A place so delicately wrapped in euphemism that even the signs outside say hospital as if a headache were being treated, not the tortured recesses of the human mind. You didn't plan to be here. No one ever really does. But perhaps your path has wandered past the stone gates of Bethlehem Royal Hospital, better known, somewhat rudely and forever, as Bedlam. The smell hits first. A pungent blend of disinfectant, damp wool, and something darker, harder to place. Despair, maybe. Or boiled cabbage, then the sound. Not screams, exactly, though some nights they echo. It's the low murmur of people arguing with voices only they can hear. The nervous laughter of attendants too exhausted to blink, the clink of metal keys and restraints, and the unsettlingly cheerful tune from a patient humming into the void. Victorian mental health care was, in theory, a revolution. The 1845 Lunacy Act finally made it a duty to care for the mentally ill, not just hide them. But the execution? Less revolutionary, more reactionary. Historians still argue whether this legislation did more harm than good, especially when many of the new patients were just poor, inconvenient, or too opinionated for polite society. You glance into a cell, or room, if you're being delicate. A woman stands by the window, tapping her forehead rhythmically against the iron bars. She doesn't notice you, or the nurse, or the fact that her hair has been hacked away in clumps. She was brought in 2 months ago for hysteria, a catch-all term for, well, everything. Anxiety, menopause, grief, backtalk. You name it, it could be hysteria. Bonus points if you were a woman. Doctors tried everything. Ice baths, rotating chairs, even a device that mimicked the motion of being spun in circles until consciousness politely exited. One treatment involved wrapping patients like mummies in cold, wet sheets and leaving them motionless for hours. Relaxing, right, and yet, amid the horror, some earnestness, you meet an older man, the resident physician, who truly believes he's helping. He insists on long walks, music therapy, and structured conversation. He even encourages his patients to paint. Some of the works hang in his office, abstract bursts of color, portraits with uncanny eyes, a landscape that looks suspiciously like an escape route. There's something noble in the attempt. However misguided the methods. Like someone trying to fix a smashed clock by listening to it tick. Slowly. Blindfolded, you pause by the day room. It's well lit, surprisingly. Patients sit in wooden chairs arranged like mismatched teeth. Some stare blankly. Others sketch. One recites poetry from memory, flawlessly, until he forgets who he is halfway through the final stanza. You wonder, quietly, who decides what madness is. After all, plenty of Victorians walking free outside these walls believe in phrenology, the idea that your skull shape determines character, or that ghosts live in mirrors, or that lightning can cure shyness if channeled just right. And don't forget Charles Dickens himself, who once described a trip to an asylum as humbling, terrible, and oddly comforting. He wasn't wrong. There are children here, too. You hate to see it, but yes, some as young as 8, locked up for melancholia or rebellious spirit. One girl, with a flower she's hidden behind her back, smiles when she sees you. She's been here for 3 years. Her parents told neighbors she went to a boarding school. You pass a corridor closed to visitors, the heavy door barred with rusted chains. The guard doesn't stop you, but he does shake his head slowly, like someone watching a ghost walk backward. Inside, the most violent patients are restrained. Leather belts. Iron cuffs. Sometimes even cages. Not because the staff is cruel, necessarily. But because they have no better ideas. In one corner, a man whispers into his hands, over and over, "Don't let the rats know my name." He looks up at you with terrifying clarity for a moment, then returns to his whispering. His record says paranoia brought on by overwork. Or possibly mercury poisoning. Mercury. Let's talk about that. It was still in use. As a medicine. Applied to sores, ingested in tonics, or rubbed into the gums for syphilis. Ironically, the side effects often mimicked insanity. Tremors. Hallucinations. Mood swings so violent they could tip a man into bedlam without a second thought. And what about the visitors? Oh yes. For a time, the asylum was open to the public. Like a twisted zoo. Londoners paid a penny to walk the galleries and watch the mad perform. Sometimes they were coaxed into singing, or fighting, or merely sobbing. For sport, eventually, this practice was outlawed. But you still feel the echo of it in every stare from a staff member sizing you up. Are you curious? Or just cruel? You take a breath and step outside. Into the colder, clearer air of evening, the asylum fades behind you, a fortress of good intentions and terrible guesses. It's quieter now. You listen to the scrape of your boots on stone and realize, sanity, like smog, shifts with the wind in Victorian London, and you keep walking. Because if you pause too long, if you let the silence stretch, you might hear something call your name from behind those barred windows, and you might answer. You're walking again, this time along a different sort of institution. The kind no one dares question, no matter how strange it smells, the Victorian Hospital. And if you thought Bedlam was unsettling, wait until you get a whiff of chloroform and ambition at St. Bartholomew's, London's oldest hospital still in use. You're going to need a strong stomach and a weaker sense of smell. Hospitals in Victorian London are not the places you go to get better. They are, more often, the places you go to die somewhere officially. The corridors are narrow, the walls damp with something that might once have been whitewash, and the air. A bracing cocktail of blood, laudanum, and stale sweat. You hesitate before entering. But then a nurse with rolled-up sleeves and eyes like a storm says, "In or out, love?" You choose in. You've barely crossed the threshold before a man groans in a bed that's little more than a straw-filled mattress. He's here for a compound fracture, meaning the bone is poking jauntily through the skin. There's no privacy curtain, no real anesthesia. Just a bottle of brandy and a wooden stick to bite, and here comes the surgeon. Coat stained. Tools gleaming. He's the very picture of Victorian medical confidence. That is, he looks like a butcher with a Latin degree. The nurse hands him a saw. Yes, a literal bone saw, and the amputation begins. There is a certain poetry in how quick he is. A good Victorian surgeon prides himself on speed. Robert Liston, the so-called fastest knife in the West End, once removed a leg in under 30 seconds. Historians still argue whether he holds the record for highest accidental fatality rate in a single procedure. Supposedly killing the patient, his assistant, and a bystander all in one enthusiastic slash. You take a step back and nearly bump into a tray of instruments being boiled in. Wait, are they boiling them? You peer closer. No. Just wiping them on the surgeon's apron between patients. Antiseptics won't become widespread until Joseph Lister, yes, that's where Listerine gets its name, makes his case in the 1860s. Before that, wounds are stitched with thread pulled from a patient's own clothing. Neat, right? The smells grow sharper as you pass into the fever ward. Typhus, cholera, and good old-fashioned consumption, that's tuberculosis, if you're wondering, compete for attention. Patients lie like discarded dolls, some muttering to themselves, others just still. A boy with bright eyes and a hollow chest tries to sit up when he sees you. He's coughing blood into a handkerchief that's redder than any sunset you've seen. You don't know his name. You won't. He'll be gone by morning. The nurses here are mostly women, most unpaid, many trained on the job or not at all. Florence Nightingale may be revolutionizing the field from afar, but most hospitals still rely on grit, guesswork, and sometimes bribes to keep things running. You overhear one nurse muttering about a patient who bribed his way into a better bed, near a window no less. Another swears by her homemade poultices, including one made from mustard and soot. Draws the poison out, she claims, tapping the side of her nose like it's a trusted barometer. Meanwhile, the doctors debate. Out loud. Over the bodies. Whether leeches work. Whether pus is a sign of healing or infection. Whether the full moon really does affect a man's blood pressure. One says it's all vapors and should be treated with fresh air. Another suggests trepanation. Drilling a hole in the skull. You don't ask what for. Then, just when you think you've seen the worst, the teaching theater beckons. Imagine a mini coliseum, except instead of lions, it's full of eager young students, and instead of gladiators, it's a semi-conscious man on a table. They're here to learn. And so, apparently, are you. The surgeon begins a lecture as he slices into the patient, explaining each organ's function with the same enthusiasm you might use to describe a particularly good meat pie. The students take notes. One faints. Another asks to take the spleen home for study. There's no patient privacy. No consent forms. Just a crowd and a chalkboard. As you slip out of the room, gently, reverently, you pass a quiet side hallway. There, two nurses are lighting candles for the dead. The hospital doesn't have a morgue, just a back room where the bodies are kept until a cart comes. One of the women hums softly. A lullaby, maybe. She looks at you, suddenly serious. And says, "Best pray you never end up in here." People leave with less than they came with. Outside again, the night air slaps your senses awake. You find yourself clutching your arm, imagining phantom pain from all those saws and shears. You didn't even lie down, and yet your legs feel weak. Hospitals are supposed to be safe. Comforting. But here, in Victorian London, they are monuments to the strange overlap between healing and horror. Where science lurches forward, dragging superstition by the collar, you walk on, grateful to breathe air that doesn't smell like formaldehyde and death, and yet, deep down, you wonder, in 100 years, what will people say about our medicine? You make your way through the foggy streets once more, but this time, the sounds that echo off the soot-stained walls are different. No frantic horse hooves or shrill market cries. Just soft murmurs. Footsteps with a purpose. It's nighttime now, and you're heading toward a very specific part of Victorian London, the part where the dead don't always stay where they're buried. Welcome to the graveyard shift. Victorian London has a bit of a corpse problem. Not enough space to bury them. Not enough time to process them. And definitely not enough silence to keep them from getting disturbed. The ground beneath your feet has been used and reused so many times that coffins sometimes float after a rainstorm. You don't think about that too long. You slip into Kensal Green Cemetery, one of the new garden cemeteries opened in the 1830s to deal with overcrowded churchyards. It's oddly peaceful, with weeping angels carved in stone and neat rows of graves under towering elms. But you're not alone. A man in a tattered waistcoat peers over his shoulder and disappears behind a crypt. That's your first hint, he's not visiting a loved one. He's working. See, the Victorian era is also the golden age of body snatching, a strange, half-criminal, half-profitable enterprise that helped fuel the era's thirst for medical knowledge. Surgeons needed cadavers to study and practice on. The law only allowed the dissection of executed criminals. But demand far outweighed supply. Enter the resurrection men. These weren't your run-of-the-mill grave robbers. No jewelry or coins. Just the corpse, thank you very much. They'd wait until burial night, then dig down just far enough to slip a hook under the armpits and yank the body out, often still in its shroud. Quick, quiet, and disturbingly efficient. The fresher, the better, you pass a shovel leaning casually against a headstone. It looks recently used. Victorians were aware of this black market horror, and they did not take it lying down. Some families installed iron cages called mortsafes over the graves of loved ones. Others hired guards. Still others rigged booby traps, not quite Home Alone level, but more like spikes in the coffin lid. One grave even had a spring-loaded pistol designed to shoot the thief. Historians still argue whether anyone was actually shot, or if it was just morbid Victorian over-engineering. You spot a rather new-looking monument that's oddly square-shaped. The stone reads "Beloved Wife and Mother." But underneath? There's likely a lead-lined coffin, triple-locked, and buried 9 feet deep. Trust no one. Not even your undertaker, of course. This macabre economy created some very creative entrepreneurs. One infamous pair, Burke and Hare, decided grave robbing was inefficient and simply began murdering people to sell their bodies. Not in London, thankfully, but their tale spread through every city like a cautionary whisper. It even inspired a wave of Gothic fiction. You start to wonder, is that just a raven in the tree above, or something else? As you cross into a poorer quarter, the air thickens again. The graveyards here aren't garden-like or serene. They're muddy pits behind chapels, often holding dozens of bodies stacked in a single trench. That smell. A blend of lime, decay, and secrets. You step lightly, respectfully, yet for all their darkness, Victorian cemeteries also became places of public fascination. People visited them for Sunday strolls, picnics even. The tombstones were ornate, almost boastful. The bigger the monument, the more successful the death. It's grief, but make it fashionable. And then there's the photography. Ah yes, post-mortem portraits. It was perfectly normal in the Victorian era to have your loved one posed for a final family photo after they passed. Sometimes with eyes painted open, sometimes held upright with special stands. Children were the most common subjects. The pictures were treasured, not morbid. You even pass a small studio near Fleet Street that once specialized in this, mourning keepsakes painted in gold on the shuttered window. The line between mourning and display was thin. Widows wore black for years. Some dyed their undergarments black too. Queen Victoria famously wore mourning clothes from Prince Albert's death in 1861 until her own death in 1901. That's 40 years of head-to-toe sadness. You've seen some emotional commitment before, but this is next level. You pass a woman clutching a black lace veil, standing very still before a modest headstone. You pause. She doesn't move. You blink, and she's gone. Maybe she was just part of your sleepy mind's trick. Or maybe she was someone's grief, still hanging around. Meanwhile, the death industry flourished. Coffin makers, weepers for hire, and those somber horse-drawn hearses with glass sides. Victorian Londoners didn't avoid death. They built an entire economy around it. One funeral home even offered tiered packages, from modest elegance to imperial procession with optional marching band. You imagine Yelp reviews like, 4 stars, coffin was nice, but band played too slow. And amid all this, spiritualism was blooming. Seances. Table rapping. Mediums claiming to hear the whispers of the beyond. Even prominent figures like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle believed it. People desperately wanted to believe their loved ones weren't gone, just transferred. If you find yourself standing in a parlor with a woman murmuring Latin over a flickering candle, you might be in a respectable Victorian household just trying to reach Uncle Percy, you're getting tired now. The moon is high. You've wandered through the business of death and mourning, through quiet gardens and crowded pits. Through the gory mechanics of resurrection men and the tenderness of grief channeled into marble angels and velvet armbands. It's strange, isn't it? How in Victorian London, death was both a terrifying reality and a deeply curated performance. The fear of the unknown, paired with the certainty of ritual. A dance with loss, always in black, you find a bench near an old crypt. It's stone-chilled by the night air. You sit. The silence here is heavier than anywhere else you've walked. But also oddly soothing, and just before your eyes close, you hear something in the distance, a shovel. Or just the wind. You wake with a jolt, not because of the cold stone against your back, or the dew beginning to cling to your coat, but because of the silence. That kind of alert silence. The kind that follows something snapping a twig. You sit upright. Your eyes scan the shadowed hedges of Kensal Green. There's no one in sight. The fog's thinner now, but it hangs low and close to the ground like something unwilling to leave. In the distance, a crow calls once, sharp, then gone. It's morning, or very nearly. The sky is bruised blue with the promise of sunrise. Time to keep moving. You make your way out of the cemetery and head toward a quieter part of the city, Bloomsbury, perhaps. But just as you're crossing Russell Square, you see something curious, a man standing on a wooden box, arms flailing, shouting about ghosts. That's not unusual. But the crowd around him is, they're listening. He's not a drunk or a street fool. He's dressed well, like a lecturer or professor. Behind him stands a banner, the Society for Psychical Research, public demonstration. A few dozen people have gathered in front of a small stage. You pause. You're curious. The Victorian era has had many obsessions: progress, punishment, politeness, but none as persistent as its interest in the paranormal. You already walked the graveyards. Now you're about to walk the ether. The Society for Psychical Research, SPR, was founded in 1882 by a group of scientists, philosophers, and scholars from Cambridge. These weren't carnival tricksters, they were the intellectual elite. Men and women who wanted to know, is the soul measurable? Can consciousness survive death? Can the living speak with the dead, not in poetry, but in data? You sidle closer. The man is demonstrating table turning. 4 people sit around a small wooden table, fingertips resting lightly on its surface. It begins to move. Subtly, then more forcefully. Some gasp, others scoff. You've seen better effects in a cheap horror film, but these Victorians, they're riveted, because the truth is, for all their emphasis on reason, Victorian Londoners were deeply superstitious. And spiritualism, which involved talking with the dead, inviting ghosts into parlors, and using science to test the unseen, offered something rare in that age of factory smog and statistical charts: hope, hope that love doesn't die. That the self doesn't end. That the part of you that feels things, that dreams, doesn't just rot in a box beneath Kensal Green. You remember a name whispered to you earlier in the walk, Florence Cook. In the early 1870s, she was a teenage medium who supposedly materialized the full-bodied ghost of a woman named Katie King during seances. Even Sir William Crookes, a respected scientist and inventor, vouched for her. She held seances in East London drawing rooms where people claimed to see Katie walking, talking, even kissing the sitters. Years later, it was likely proven a hoax. Florence may have been Katie King in costume. But back then, in gaslit parlors thick with incense and grief, people wanted to believe more than they wanted to know. That tension, the one between proof and longing, runs like a tightrope across the whole city. And then there's ectoplasm. The man on the box gestures to a poster with a photo in black and white that looks eerie. It shows a woman in trance, mouth slightly agape, with white gauzy material pouring from her nose. Captured spirit matter, the man proclaims. Proof of the soul's substance. You're less convinced. It looks like cheesecloth, but people believed. They wanted to. Especially after the losses of the Crimean War, and later, World War I. The upper crust of London, ladies in lace and gentlemen in tailcoats, held séances regularly, hoping to speak with sons, brothers, and lovers who never returned from battle. Even Queen Victoria consulted mediums after Albert's death. Desperate for contact. One séance claimed to pass a message from Albert that he'd been watching over her during a thunderstorm. She reportedly wept. You walk away from the demonstration slowly, the crowd murmuring behind you. You pass by a shop window full of spiritualist tools, planchettes, crystal balls, and a stack of leather-bound books with titles like The Haunted Mind and Phantoms of Science, and in the reflection, for a moment, you see someone standing behind you. A woman in black, veil drawn. You turn, no one, just fog. You continue down a narrower street, past homes where curtains don't quite close, where lamps flicker even when no one's near them. There's a sense here that the veil between this world and the next is thinner. You remember one last story. Not from the fringes, but from Westminster Abbey itself. Within those stone walls, where monarchs are crowned and buried, some say a white lady still walks at midnight. She's said to have died of grief, waiting for a fiancé lost to war. Now she waits still, among the tombs of kings. You never saw her. But you know, if you stayed long enough, listened quietly enough, you just might, and maybe that's the enduring allure of the Victorian ghost story. In a world obsessed with invention, the Victorians held tight to the one thing they couldn't build, couldn't cure, couldn't measure. The possibility that we are never truly alone, that even in the quietest corners of London, someone, or something, is waiting to be heard. You pull your coat tighter, the gas lamps flicker once more, and the city exhales. You feel it before you hear it, the low rumble of wheels over cobblestone. Somewhere behind you, a carriage approaches. You glance over your shoulder, half expecting a spectral horse-drawn hearse like the one said to roll through Highgate on moonless nights, but it's just a milk cart. The driver nods, clearly more afraid of being late than of ghosts. You step aside, letting it pass, and continue your walk toward the river. Morning in Victorian London doesn't begin with birdsong, it begins with labor. The world around you is waking up in stages. First the scavengers, then the shopkeepers, then the scent of burning coal curling up from chimneys like grey ribbons. If you're imagining the dawn breaking over a quaint English town with teacups and buttered toast, think again. It smells like soot, stale sweat, and horse dung, with just the faintest hint of overboiled cabbage. You pass a row of terraced houses, small but respectable. A maid in a cap and apron is already scrubbing a doorstep. She looks barely awake and more than a little resentful. She's not alone. By the mid-1800s, there were over 1 million domestic servants in Britain, and nearly 1 in 3 households in London employed at least one. Often girls from rural villages, some as young as 12, they came to the city for a better life and found themselves elbow-deep in chamber pots and bone-chilling laundry instead. You catch a glimpse of a kitchen through a basement window. A scullery maid is lighting the range, eyes red with exhaustion. It's not even 6 o'clock. She's probably already been yelled at, and here's a bit of dark trivia for you. Servants were expected to become invisible. That wasn't just social decorum, it was a skill. There were actual etiquette guides on how to silently pass trays, how to walk without creaking floorboards, how to vanish when the bell rang. Some homes even had separate staircases just for servants so they wouldn't sully the sightlines of polite society. But not all house staff were quietly submissive. Historians still debate the true story behind the so-called maid riots of 1876. Some say it was simply a coordinated strike. Others say it was a violent uprising of underpaid and overworked women who'd had enough of cleaning up after drunk men and collapsing from cholera in drafty attics. Whatever the truth, something happened that year, something loud, brief, and almost entirely erased from official records. You wonder what became of them, but while you're pondering justice for the invisible class, a far louder, brasher sound tears through the quiet, a street organ. A cranked box with painted panels, blaring out a clunky tune as a man in patched trousers turns the handle. Beside him, a trained monkey in a waistcoat dances awkwardly on a tin tray. Street performance was one of the more colorful slices of London's economic pie. Organ grinders, puppet shows, strongmen lifting anvils, and fire eaters with questionable dental insurance, they were the unofficial theater of the working class. If you couldn't afford Drury Lane, you could stand in the mud and watch a man balance 3 tankards on his nose for a penny, and if you were lucky, the monkey didn't bite, you drop a coin in the tray. The man nods, and the monkey salutes. You're not sure who's more tired, you follow the music south, where the road starts to smell wetter. The Thames is near, once you reach the embankment. The wind greets you like a slap, sharp, damp, smelling of salt and smoke. The sun hasn't risen fully, but the sky is a pale watercolor now, and the great brown river churns like it's digesting something unfortunate, which, historically, it often was. The great stink of 1858 wasn't a metaphor, it was a literal, unbearable event. Heatwaves mixed with a backed-up sewage system turned the Thames into a festering broth of disease and decay. The smell was so overpowering that Parliament members fled their chambers. Curtains were soaked in vinegar. Books warped. People fainted. Out of that olfactory apocalypse came one small mercy, the construction of Joseph Bazalgette's modern sewer system, which saved the city from its own waste. And still, the river was, and still is, London's artery. You lean against the stone balustrade and watch the water twist. Barges pass like shadows, slow and heavy. On the far bank, St. Paul's Cathedral rises through the haze like something out of a painting. An echo of sanctity in a city built on contradictions. Behind you, the streets hum louder. Breakfast smells drift from the pubs. The workday begins for the living, but the night still clings to you like damp wool, because Victorian London wasn't just a place of tea and top hats, of fog and footmen. It was a machine. One built from flesh and fire and soot. One where bodies fed the gears. Where beauty bloomed in alleys and blood ran into drains, and you. You survived it, just barely. You close your eyes. You take a deep breath of river air. The wind tangles your hair, and then, somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls, not ominous. Not triumphant. Just, real, you're back in your world now. Slowly waking from theirs. The sound of the bell fades, like an echo caught in fog, and as you turn from the river, your feet heavy, your mind quiet, you know the journey is ending. Victorian London slowly recedes behind you, not in time, perhaps, but in intensity. The grime, the grind, the glorious strangeness of it all fades like steam on a windowpane, but before you fully leave it, there's one last thing to witness. One last corner of this humming, heaving, horrifying city, you follow a narrow lane eastward. It's early, but not too early for the printers. The Fleet Street presses are already rumbling. You hear them before you see them, a low, rhythmic churn, like thunder wrapped in ink. You duck through an alley and find yourself staring at a chaos of paper and men yelling over clattering type. This is the beating heart of London's information machine, and it smells like grease, sweat, and ambition. The daily papers are being set, letter by tiny letter, by men whose fingers are ink-stained and eyes rimmed red from long nights. The Victorian era was obsessed with news. Cheap printing, rising literacy, and a public hungry for drama meant headlines could ruin reputations by breakfast. If Twitter had a crank handle and a chimney sweep, it would have looked like this. Here's your mainstream fact: the first British tabloid, the Daily Mail, wouldn't launch until 1896, but its spiritual ancestors were already alive and well in the form of penny dreadfuls and scandal sheets. Murders. Affairs, seances, if it could be sensationalized, it would be. The truth was optional. Circulation was everything, and here's your fringe tidbit: some journalists paid children to spy on aristocrats. Yes, actual child gossip mercenaries. Little Oliver Twist types, except they'd eavesdrop on drawing-room scandals and then sell what they heard for pocket change and meat pies. Historians still argue whether Victorian newspapers truly reflected public opinion or simply fed it like a goose before Christmas. What's clear is that the press had power. And power loves a crowd. You pause outside a newsstand. A man is pasting up the front page for the day, some tale of a chimney collapse, a missing girl, and a haunting in Whitechapel. The usual, but your eye catches something else, a scrap of verse printed below the fold. Something short, anonymous. A poem written in the margins of a century, beneath the gaslight's golden smear. The world is cruel, but oddly dear, a loaf, a lamp, a hand to hold, this city's stories all grow old, you stare at it a moment longer than you need to. Then you smile, just a little, and keep walking, your boots are quieter now. The city has softened, you pass a constable sipping tea from a cracked mug. He nods at you. A hansom cab rolls by, drawn by a tired horse with feathers tied to its harness. A flower girl sets up her wares on a corner, her fingers blue from the cold but arranging daffodils like they're gold. London is waking, the final stretch of your walk is less crowded, more reflective. A school bell chimes somewhere distant. A baker slides trays of fresh bread into a window. You catch the yeasty warmth as you pass and, for the first time in hours, feel truly hungry, and a little sleepy, because despite everything, the soot, the stink, the moral panic, the casual child labor, there's something curiously comforting about surviving Victorian London. Like you've earned your place on the timeline. Like you've stared history in its grimy, buck-toothed face and said, all right. I see you, and now, you're done. You find a bench beneath a gas lamp still flickering in the morning light and sit. Not because you're tired, but because there's nothing left to run from. The city has stopped chasing you, for now. Wind down, the lamp above you dims, as if it, too, is ready for rest. The city behind you sighs, a great and ancient thing settling into its bones. You lean back against the bench. The stone beneath you is cold, but not unfriendly. The wind brushes your hair aside one last time, softer now, like an apology for all the noise it carried earlier, and for a moment, everything holds still. Victorian London, with its grime and grandeur, its fog and fire, has receded. The scent of soot is gone. The clatter of hooves, the gossip of newspapers, the cry of milk boys. All of it has melted into something quieter. Something dreamlike. You're safe now, let your breath slow. Let the weight of your eyelids pull gently downward. Let your mind drift not to the horror or hardship, but to the quiet resilience tucked into every corner of that city. A candle flickering in a garret window. A child's laugh echoing through an alley. The click of a baker's tray as morning broke. Let the city fade into sepia, let yourself float. You've wandered through a world most wouldn't survive, and you've returned with nothing but soot in your hair and a story in your bones. Let it go now. The story is done, and as the last gas lamp fades, you lie back into the darkness, soft and quiet, and let sleep take you the rest of the way.